Welcome back to Education, a Clusterfuck in Need of Repair. This episode is the second in my exploration of constructivist learning theory and includes both some smarty pants ideas from theory and my own brand of well-honed outrage at what the fuck we think we're doing in schools right now. Before we start, I'd like to emphasize that all ideas presented in this podcast are my own and do not reflect the thoughts, opinions, or positions of my employer, Emerson College, its programs, or its representatives. The meaning-making of humans, from infancy on, are powerful determinants of what we believe, what we become, and how we learn. Students are makers of meaning. Constructivism identifies the learner as the central figure in learning, not the teacher, the learner. Welcome back to Education, a Clusterfuck in Need of Repair. Or just welcome for the first time. I mean, how would I know, really? You could have been looking for dirty podcasts and stumbled on mine by accident. Find me a podcast with the word fuck in the title. Wait, what the hell is this about? Education? Snooze. Tricky bitch. Yeah, I sort of am. But in any case, welcome. This episode is the second in my exploration of constructivist learning theory and includes both some smarty pants ideas from theory and my own brand of well-honed outrage at what the fuck we think we're doing in schools right now. It's not constructivism, I'll tell you that. This episode, number 13, or is that bad luck? Should I skip 13 and go straight to 14 like they do in hotels sometimes? No. What are we, children? I'm not afraid of a number, though I've never really liked the number 19 that much. I wonder why. What happened to me where the number 19 was involved that would, well, let's face it, prejudice me against it? I honestly don't remember what caused me to assign it that negative meaning, but it did. It still lingers to this day, torturing me, taunting me. Okay, I'm overstating. It just bugs me a little. Fortunately, there is a tenet of constructivism that might help me explain it and explain the title of this episode at the same time. It's called Making Meaning. Whose meaning? What meaning? I'll be talking about one of the central tenets of constructivism, the idea that students are makers of meaning and how that affects what happens with students and teachers in schools. With examples. But first, some smarty pants theory. Constructivist learning is a theory of education that developed through both observation and scientific study, now including brain-based learning theories about how people learn. There are many nifty references, articles, and books which I won't cite here. That's a different podcast. If you really want to immerse yourself, I recommend Constructivism, Theory, Perspectives, and Practice by Catherine Fosnot. I digressed. Sorry. Back to smarty pants theory. From infancy on, we are active makers of meaning, integrating new experiences into our held understandings and knowledge of our world, asking questions, exploring, and assessing what we know. How do we know this? Here's an example of some research. In 1981, researchers wired classical music to the hospital bassinets of infants from 1 to 12 hours old. When the baby sucked on their pacifiers, the music played. When they stopped sucking, it stopped. The babies quickly realized that they were controlling the music and they started playing with it. Suck, 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 music. Stop sucking, no music. Then the researchers disconnected the playing of the music from the sucking. It went on and off randomly. The babies flipped out. They screamed and cried, refusing to eat or sleep until the music was recalibrated with their sucking. This was a germinal piece of research about just how early in life people start making meaning of their environment and how important the role of agency is in that meaning making. And now, with the technology available to us to study babies in utero, we know that the meaning making starts even earlier than that. And even more complicated, those meanings become foundational scripts or schema, depending on whose theory you read. I use scripts because, I'm in theater. They mean basically the same thing, but publish or perish. Academicians have to publish, and so creating a new word to describe something is a good way to get your work published. Okay, but think of it like building a brick wall. The bottommost bricks support the next level, which supports the next level, and so on. So if a baby's hungry and cries and someone comes and feeds them, they develop a script that says, when I'm hungry, I'll be fed. If they're wet and someone changes them, the script says, when I'm uncomfortable, someone will help me with that, and so on. And if those needs are not met, if no one feeds or changes or holds them, those beliefs become foundational as well. A good example of that was in the 80s, I think it was, Romanian orphans. There was a big expose about the really terrible conditions in Romanian orphanages where they had 300 babies to one caretaker. They didn't have enough food. And so American families adopted those Romanian orphans. And what they discovered was that even once they were in a different environment where their needs were met, where there was someone there, where there was food for them when they were hungry, they still demonstrated behaviors connected to those original scripts. They hid food under their beds. They had difficulty attaching. That's how important and embedded those foundational scripts are. And you really can't get rid of them unless the person has a massive stroke. I had a grad student once who had a series of 4 strokes when he was 9 years old, and it eliminated everything. He survived. Obviously, he was in grad school, but he could no longer speak, walk. He was like a newborn, and he reacquired all of those skills, but he came out of it with an attachment disorder because people do not respond to a 9-year-old the way they respond to an infant. So the meaning making of humans from infancy on are powerful determinants of what we believe, what we become, and how we learn. According to Hine, in discussing Dewey, constructing meaning is learning. There is no other kind. In constructivist learning, the student is transformed from a passive recipient of true information, that's a complicated construct, to an active participant in the learning process through the use of hands-on tasks, project-based and inquiry-based experiences, and real-world applications of curriculum topics. When students reflect on an experience, they simultaneously learn content and develop mental models for the process of learning, the how, which they can apply to more advanced challenges as they continue to learn. This capacity and skill set characterize what Zaretta Hammond calls independent learners, who are prepared for higher order thinking. And students who understand and apply the how find their ideas gaining in complexity and power and develop their ability to integrate new information. For example, think again about the brick wall, except now we're at the layer where intellectual understandings are being constructed on top of those foundational beliefs. For example, students who've learned the basics of ancient Egypt, pharaohs, slaves, concepts of death, building huge edifices, developing a complex society, can build on that foundational knowledge, that factual knowledge, to, for example, consider the morality of creating impressive structures on the backs of slaves, or hypothesize what might have happened if there were no slaves, and so on. In constructivist teaching, one of the teacher's main roles becomes to encourage this learning and reflection process. Now, constructivist learning has been the gold standard of what we know about how people learn for more than half a century. If you explore the offspring of constructivism, multiple intelligences theory, social emotional learning, culturally responsive teaching, brain-based learning. The history of educational research from the 70s until today has built on and refined constructivist learning, not supplanted it. It's held up well. Initially, it was based on ideas introduced by John Dewey and Maria Montessori in the area of progressive education. But constructivism has been explored and developed by theorists from educational psychology, cognitive development, social constructivism, sociocultural learning, and instructional scaffolding. That's a lot of big brains on this topic. Most recently, constructivism has been the subject of research on brain development. Studies by Sousa in 2016 and Bransford, Brown, and Cocking in 2000, for example, support the use of constructivist learning approaches. They demonstrate that content-specific higher-order thinking generates the growth of neurological pathways that extend the capacity of the brain to think in complex and abstract ways about that content. Think about that. Constructivist learning promotes the development of both the ability to think in higher order ways and the neurological systems necessary to support that thinking. That is one powerhouse learning theory. As I talked about in episode 12, I'm using the aspects of best practice in constructivist teaching and learning discussed by Barbara Rogoff in her book on situated cognition. Its title is Apprenticeship in Thinking. It was published in 1990. They are: 1. Students make meaning from the things we teach them. 2. Knowledge is socially and culturally situated, meaning different things for different kids. 3. Contexts for learning are a requirement for retention of knowledge. 4. Students need to actively engage with hands-on tasks that have real-world applications in order to maximize learning and understanding. 5. Students can only learn information that is scaffolded on understandings they already hold. 6. The role of the teacher in constructivist learning is that of a coach or facilitator. 7. Emotion holds a complex role in learning, and a student's sense of belonging in the learning community is critical for success in learning to happen. 8. As part of belonging, constructivist teaching emphasizes the importance of small group learning and peer mentoring. 9. Constructivism recognizes that higher order thinking is content dependent, that analysis, evaluation, and synthesis rely on the presence of context and subject matter to occur. The components I'll be talking about today are: 1, students are makers of meaning; 2, knowledge is socially and culturally situated; and 3, about the critical importance of scaffolding. Students can only learn things that are scaffolded on understandings they already hold. I'm going to expand briefly. 1, students are makers of meaning. Constructivism identifies the learner as the central figure in learning, not the teacher, the learner. So teaching needs to be structured with that in mind, and curriculum and instruction should be tailored to the meaning-making orientation of each student. 2, knowledge is socially and culturally situated. Both what counts as knowledge and the path to acquire it are socially situated, and the social world is culturally constructed. 3, scaffolding is crucially important to learning. Students can only learn information that's scaffolded on understandings they already hold. These understandings can be content-specific, they can be culturally situated, or they can be emotionally based. But assimilation of new ideas needs to be connected to held knowledge, or it's not retained. It never makes it into long-term memory. After the research on constructivism in the 70s through the 90s, the focus of instruction in schools took the meaning-making of students into account, and lots of theories and approaches were launched to facilitate this. Multiple intelligences theory, learning styles theory, project-based learning, and so on were designed to identify how each kid made meaning while learning and attempted to sculpt curriculum to engage as many kids as possible. And it was improving outcomes in schools. Then No Child Left Behind came in and blew it all to shit. What? I hear you cry? Isn't that a little unfair to No Child Left Behind? No, it isn't. For clarification, let's go back to that brick wall. You have a kid who has built a sturdy foundation of meaning making. That child, we'll call them Remy, has been cared for, and as a result, that expectation has been mortared into place. Then, during infancy and toddlerhood, Remy has been exposed to a variety of stimuli and has continued to make meaning from those experiences. Everything from hearing music, to seeing colors, to touching different textures in the first months, to playing with blocks or reading books or throwing a ball or finger painting in toddlerhood. But the variables in how kids are raised, by whom and with what values, becomes a factor in their meaning making. For example, is mud a delightful, gooey plaything or gross and dirty? Is Jell-O for eating or for squishing? Is it okay to tear the pages of a book, or is that a really bad thing? Some people don't mind it. It drives me insane, but okay, whatever. Who are your family members? Your nuclear family or a wider circle of aunts, uncles, grandparents, even neighbors? You get the drift. The values and beliefs of different cultures, races, and religions factor into that meaning making as well. And the meaning made from each experience gets built into that brick wall, mortared into place as a foundation for further learning later on. Then school happens. Early schooling used to be focused primarily on socialization, learning to play nice in the sandbox, don't bite, pushing is bad, listen to the teacher. The foundational skills of academic learning, basic literacy and numeracy, sequencing, image recognition, etc., were saved for after socialization was in place. This more or less allowed children to build new understandings, to scaffold on their existing foundation, to transfer their meaning-making skills to this new environment. But once No Child Left Behind became law, and the consequences for failing to meet the bar of adequate yearly progress became increasingly draconian, schools focused their effort on preparing kids for the tests. So space for different ways of making meaning of new ideas largely disappeared. Meaning was made by exposure to decontextualized chunks of knowledge, which was reinforced primarily through the use of worksheets that closely mirrored the dynamics of the tests. Not only did kids have difficulty making meaning of new information this way, not only were they unable to scaffold this new information onto their existing understandings and thereby cement them in long-term memory, they were bored out of their fucking minds. Behavior became an increasing issue, even at the kindergarten level, as little kids who were not developmentally ready to read and write were pushed to learn. Why were they pushed to learn? In order to be able to take the standardized No Child Left Behind test in first grade. For those of you who have discovered the pleasures of Resident Alien, I'll quote Harry Vanderspiegel. That is some bullshit. Then, in order to meet that impossible adequate yearly progress standard, we turned back to that old chestnut, behaviorism. Tchotchkes from the goodie drawers and pizza parties for positive reinforcement, the looming presence of police officers in the halls even of elementary schools for negative reinforcement. And nobody looked at these dynamics and asked, what the fuck are we doing? Having been raised in the 60s and 70s, the meaning I made of this is that this is repression, that someone is benefiting financially, and that it's wrong. But hey, that's just what my brick wall looks like. It's not impossible to go back to constructivist models of teaching. If you listen to the interview with Ryan Roop in episode 12, you may recognize this in some of the approaches taken at the Francis W. Parker Charter School. Not only with the students, who have a lot of options in how they demonstrate their knowledge and understandings, but with the teachers, who get to decide to some extent how they teach the topics they'll teach, like having students design and build ideal prisons as the final project on a course about prisons and society. In researching how teachers help students make meaning, there were good examples in a podcast episode called "As a Teacher, Why Should I Make Student Agency a Priority?" from BAM Radio Network. One teacher, Lori Manville, said, quote, "It's the teacher's job to provide the space and the mechanisms to have the students explore their ideas and interests. One simple example I use in my classroom is the sticky note. What students do, for example, with a service project is I would ask them the question, what would you prefer? What are you interested in? They write their idea on the sticky note and place it next to the door. And then the next day, we put students together into groups." Another teacher, Keisha Rembert, said, quote, "One of the things I tried to do as a middle school teacher was to center students as much as possible. I held focus groups with students, and I would hold a couple focus groups a quarter. I opened up the curriculum to students, and students looked at the curriculum with me and said, these are the things we're interested in learning. And then they helped me create assessments and helped me teach the lesson. So they weren't just ancillary in the process. They were integral in the process, and they were teachers themselves. I saw kids that would normally disengage really engage, and their peers engaged as a result." These are not difficult ideas to implement. They don't take a lot of time, and they both take advantage of kids' meaning making and help them develop deeper understandings of how they learn. And because they utilize higher order thinking, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, they stimulate the development of neurological structures that support higher order thinking. And not to be a bummer, but students who don't have the opportunity to think deeply find their capacity to do so severely inhibited by the restriction on their brain development. So though it's true that the more a student knows, the more they can learn, the inverse is also true. The less a student knows, the less they can learn due to insufficient neural development. Just saying. The final piece of this constructivist puzzle turns up frequently in researching the topic: the critical role of agency in all learning. Though not one of Rogoff's identified tenets of constructivist learning theory, it's implied in many of them and is central to satisfaction for both teachers and students in school contexts. It is central to engagement. It's central to meaning making. It's central to fucking learning. And it doesn't cost anything. What more could we ask from our teaching models? The next episode will explore the crucial role of agency as a facet of constructivist teaching. We will hopefully drop it on Friday, April 10th. It's the end of semester for me. Things are busy. So, in the meantime, if you have a constructivist element in your teaching that you think would be helpful to your fellow educators, please DM me in my Instagram account at educationclusterf_CK. or email it to me at educationclusterfck@gmail.com, and I'll share them at the next episode. I'll leave out your name if you prefer. The little voice you hear in the background is the voice of my grandson. He's making some meaning with some toys right this minute. As always, thank you for listening. If you have time, please post a review or share this with someone you think it would be useful for. I'll talk at you in about 2 weeks.
J like the letter, I'm making several waves. I know the mission is same. I made a splash, now all of my passes last like running a race with Usain. I keep it coming like this is buffet. And if I'm stumbling, I'm in the grave. Never gon' fumble it. I get the bag and I run with it, gunning it, gunning it, gunning it, gunning it.